And conflicting developments, are we expecting escalation or de-escalation in Ukraine? Staying with the developments, we are going to bring in retired U.S. Army captain and author of The Spirit of a True Patriot, J Ernest. Douglas, welcome to Newsroom. Thanks for joining us. Before we dive into these latest developments, can you refresh our audience of the status of the war prior to the U.S. election, which seems like ages ago now, including the escalation of North Korean involvement?
Well, thank you for having me. Greatly appreciate the time to visit with you and your viewers today. Well, prior to the election change, we had no hope in sight. We had thought that this war was hopeless, that it was endless, it was going to continue on. The government, the Biden administration was continuing to send arms. They were, putting themselves on network TV and mainstream media, signing bombs and sending bombs that our American taxpayers paid for to ship overseas to create more war and destruction and carnage on civilians in that area. And right now, we have a glimmer of hope that things can actually, strike peace in that region of the globe.
And where specifically, though, what was the stalemate between Russia and Ukraine on the ground?
The stalemate is Russia has taken territory over the last, 1,000 days of this war, as we're on the anniversary of that 1,000 days. Significant territory has been taken. Now, that territory is only about 1 or 2% of the region of Russia, but we all know from the Persian Russia era of time, the Russians don't stop. They don't give up. They always pound on. Even though their civilian population has been decimated, their soldiers have been killed, 100,000 deaths, 1 million injured, people displaced, the economy shattered, they still fight on. And they don't have a choice as civilians. They just continue to go. So when Putin is pushing forward and there's no hope in sight, and then you have the U.S. allies and us specifically contributing billions and hundreds of billions of dollars to the war effort, it just seems like it's hopeless. I didn't anticipate any change, but thankfully we had a change in administration that does see hope in bringing this conflict to an end.
Now, moving over to that, President-elect Trump, of course, campaigned on ending the war in one day, which seems like a bold promise. But Zelensky and Trump have spoken directly following the election. And I want to read what Zelensky said over the weekend. He said, quote, "Of course, with the policy of this team who will now govern the White House, the war will be over sooner. This is their approach, their pledge to their society, and it is really essential to them." What do you make of this dynamic with Trump and Zelensky?
Well, the dynamic is, based in 2016, President Trump had an initiative called Promises Kept, and he made a promise to the American people that he was going to end this war. He said it, 1,000 times, if you will, on the campaign trail. He was going to bring it to an end. Number one, not contributing arms to that area, not giving billions of dollars to have war, and not bringing these two sides together. It was just a win-win-win. Now, this all started from the Biden batch foreign policy initiatives, and somebody in that situation room was making decisions. And I don't believe, and most people in this country don't believe, Biden was making these decisions. It's the inertia. They call it structural inertia in warfare training. And I talk about this in my book. When you get on a path, it's path dependent. It's so hard to get off your path. Similar what happened in Vietnam War. You start to move forward and your propulsion pulls you forward, the inertia, and you can't stop. And now we've invested hundreds of billions of dollars, and we don't want to lose. We don't want to look as we conceded. So this inertia pulls us forward in warfare to continue to strive to win, and that to win on behalf of the Ukrainians, which is just destructive to mankind, destructive to infrastructure, destructive to the American people, because we're paying for it and we're putting ourselves at risk for World War III. So we have hope now. And again, we haven't made significant progress, but there's hope. And President Trump's administration is talking that it's possible. And Volodymyr Zelensky has now made public statements that he believes it's possible and that it's more possible with Trump at the helm.
And not so fast. Now, adding another dimension to all this, according to the widespread reports, anonymous officials are stating that President Biden has authorized Ukraine to use U.S.-supplied missiles to strike inside of Russia. Similar thing maybe coming out of the EU, supporters. So how should we understand the timing of this development of Biden now supposedly, he hasn't said it from the podium, but it was said in anonymously to various news outlets, that this might happen. So how do you make sense of this development and the timing of it?
A great question. You know, and with the utmost respect to the Biden administration, this was operationally unnecessary. It was not needed. It was winding down, an attempt to wind it down, and they continue to, throw gas on the fire. Right now, this is something that did not need to be taken. You know, we have a possibility of peace, but now they announced they're going to put long-range missiles into Russia just to escalate the conflict. It actually seems to us in the military world and people that analyze these conflicts that it was done intentionally. You know, it's something to just, put gasoline on the fire and incite more violence across the nation. But the good news is we have taken a step back from the rhetoric that's come out. Even though you see more bombs going off this morning, you see, Russia lobbing more warheads into that area. We believe that it's escalating down, and with the rhetoric coming down, it's going to help significantly bring it to a close.
And now let's pivot over to the European perspective. At the end of last week, Russian President Putin and German Chancellor Scholz spoke for the first time since before the war. Can you explain the Russia-Germany dynamic and how this impacts the geopolitics that are happening there? In particular, Germany was getting all of their gas from Russia prior to the war. So I'd love to get your sense of Germany being the largest within the EU, how this new development, this thaw, plays a part in this whole puzzle.
Well, great question. And this goes back, a generation ago when we won World War II and the Germans were driven out of that area and the Russians and Americans took hold in World War II, and the relationship that ensued with the Berlin Wall and so forth, and just the back and forth, the tension that's been in that region for years and years and years. But Russia has something that everybody in the globe needs, and that's fuel, gasoline, oil, and they have other resources that are impervious to success of other nations in that area. So when the war came and they pulled out and they stopped buying gas from there, that was bad. Not only bad for Russia not to have revenue, but bad for the German citizens because they don't have gasoline and oil to fuel their car and drive their economy. So just to see these two leaders talk is a huge accomplishment. And sitting back from a military strategy perspective, the accomplishments of this war have been very small. I mean, like I mentioned a moment ago, only 1% to 2% of the entire region of Russia has been taken from Ukraine, but yet they have 100,000 deaths, 1 million injured, billions of dollars of infrastructure destroyed on both sides. I've read estimates that 70% of the government's infrastructure in Ukraine destroyed. Just a horrific loss of life, and limb, and elderly and women and children that have been injured, and the horrific loss of resources, which people in this area of the globe don't have a lot of money. They suffer. They live in the top 5% of our country is the bottom 1% of that country. So it is great news to be able to bring them together. And again, if you can just look at where we were 2 weeks ago prior to the election, we thought it was hopeless. And today we have a glimmer of hope. We believe it's possible. The dynamics have been changed. The boundaries have been expanded as these leaders have talked. And there's talk of Zaladimmers and Zelensky talking about bringing us to the table and that Trump can actually put a deal together. So we're optimistic in the military community that we can have an end and that these boundaries will expand and success will be achieved. And by success, I mean bringing the war to a conclusion for the good of mankind.
Well, we appreciate your perspectives in joining us today. Retired U.S. Army captain and author of The Spirit of a True Patriot, Douglas Ernest. Thank you.
Thank you.